Hello and welcome to the first Shamrock Sports of the semester, of the year 2020, and of the decade. Today we're answering the question that everyone has gotten countless times this break. How was your Christmas break? With each of the winter sports that are taking place right now around Notre Dame. So stay tuned for that after our intro. You're listening to Shamrock Sports.
Hello, I'm Father John Jenkins, President of the University of Notre Dame, and thank you for watching Shamrock Sports.
On 3rd and 8, drops back, the Irish bring 5. Thrown to the left, intercepted. Kyle Hamilton will go. Touchdown, Notre Dame. 1st and 10 from their own 42. They give to around the right side on the reverse. Running free. The 10, the 5. Touchdown, Notre Dame. Touchdown, Notre Dame. This is going to be a touchdown. Touchdown, Chris Finley. Touchdown, Notre Dame.
Welcome back to Shamrock Sports. Joining me now is Finley Corrigan, who's going to give us a recap of all things men's basketball over break while we weren't here on campus to see what was going on. So Finley, how was men's basketball's break?
We had a bit of a heartbreaking break, actually. We played a lot of close games. We went 2 and 3, which is not horrible, but being that our games were actually determined between less than 5 points is a bit of a disappointment. So we started off the break at Indiana University, and we lost by 2, but we were down by 17 at one point. So it's pretty impressive that we were able to come back. From there, we won against Syracuse, which is a good ACC win, but we only won by 1 point. Mooney, Gibbs, and Hub all carried the Irish in this one, all scoring more than 20 points, which is very good. We also went on an 11-0 run to put us up 8 with 10 minutes left. So that was definitely a good win for the ACC. Then the NC State loss was unfortunately one that I want to cover because it was so close. We blew an 11-point lead, and we were outscored 39-23 in the second half. So obviously the second half was definitely not a great one for us. Prentice Hub, however, played one of the best games of his career, scoring 24 points. So that was very impressive. But Mooney fouled out in the final 2 minutes, and we just couldn't manage to score after that.
Well, it seems like this is a team that has all of the pieces, and now it's just bringing them all together. There have been so many close games that it's tough to see those close losses and also still easy to celebrate those victories, even if they are by a small margin. But yeah, like you said, in the past 5 games, they have been decided by 5 points or less on both sides of the coin for the Irish. So definitely frustrating when you lose to Syracuse by 2 after carrying a good lead in the first half in that game this week on January 22nd. So a lot of those similar contests for men's basketball, a team that seems to be right on the brink of something great and just has a hard time getting over that. Right. But one guy who has been consistent for them is John Mooney, who now has the record for the most consecutive double-doubles in contests at Notre Dame. It's a program record now set this week against Syracuse. So talk about him and just how important he's been for this team, Finley.
Yeah, so he's obviously very crucial for the team. Not only can he score, but he can rebound, play defense. You know, he's a great all-around player. So I think it's very impressive that he sets the program record now this week. But yeah, he's definitely been a great person for the Irish to have.
And Jim Boeheim, the Syracuse coach this week, said, if you don't think John Mooney is one of the top 25 players in the country, I don't know what you're watching. So very high praise from an opponent's coach and really shows how much Mooney brings to this program. So he's definitely been a bright spot for the program. But yeah, otherwise, you know, some of those tough losses and just being really close, trailing by 12 at the half in that Louisville game over break. So while we were gone, we missed a lot of these close contests for the Irish. And now heading into the rest of the ACC slate, it's a tough conference to play in, even though some of these teams, we talked about UNC earlier, when they lost Cole Anthony now, have not been having the success that they were predicted to have with their star player especially. But, you know, it's an interesting slate in the ACC, and Notre Dame has a chance to be in the middle of the pack still and maintain that, but it's just so many of these close contests.
I agree 100%. I think that I'm hoping that we can finish off the season strong and hopefully win some of these big ACC games coming up, but I'm hoping that we'll finish in the middle of the pack.
Yeah, so with that conference slate remaining, Notre Dame, led by John Mooney, of course, will try and compete with some of these teams that they're going to play and try to win some of these games that really come down to the wire as opposed to dropping those close contests as they have. But that's all right now for men's basketball, and right now we're going to bring on Kieran Cantwell to talk about women's basketball. And women's basketball, a similar break. Not really the results that this team might have been expecting, going 2-4 over the break. So Kieran now here to talk about those games for us. Hi, Kieran.
Hello.
How was women's basketball's break?
Well, women's basketball started off the break with the ACC, went 2-5. Unusually bad start for them in the ACC and the bottom half of the rankings. We started off a home game against Clemson. We weren't really in it until the end. Kind of came back. We lost by 16 points. We were down 24 at the start of the fourth quarter, so that was a game that maybe we started to show signs of life at the end. Maybe carried over the momentum to the next game. We headed over to Pittsburgh, got a big win over them. Big games from Michaela Vaughn and Destiny Walker. My fault. And then what I see as the toughest game of the break, we went into Syracuse, went into overtime. Syracuse hit a really big time three with 6 seconds left to tie it up at 60, and then just carried that momentum into overtime on an 11-0 run to start the period. And then it looks worse than it is with the final score being 74-63, but we played a tough game there. And then that was a really hard game because that started off our 4-game losing streak. Boston College, and then NC State, number 8 team in the nation, usually a marquee matchup with high-level programs, but we couldn't keep up, lost by over 30 there. But then our most recent game, we were able to get a big win over Miami to give us some momentum heading into the rest of the ACC schedule. We won by 23 points, big second half, scored 48 points after halftime, and big games from Sam Brunel and also Destiny Walker again there.
Yeah, so when we look at this recap, well, first you mentioned the name Michaela Vaughn, which is big because Michaela Vaughn is back from a knee injury that she suffered early in the season. But at the same time, freshman Anaya Peoples tore her labrum, so she's out. So a little bit of movement there with injuries for the women's team. And so that's one thing to keep in mind, is that it is helpful to have Michaela Vaughn back, but at the same time, you lose a freshman who's been very valuable. And that's really been the name of the game for them this year, is they don't have the depth that they're used to having. They don't really have the returning talent. This is a team that lost over 98% of their returning scoring from last year. So really, it's just, trying to combine all of these different pieces and all of these really inexperienced pieces when you have 2 freshmen and 2 grad transfers starting for you in the beginning of the season. It's a recipe for having some troubles in the beginning of the season. So when you get into the second half of the season now, the hope, I think, is that you can get all of that to start coming together and start winning games, and maybe Miami's the start of that.
Yeah, you mentioned Anaya Peoples. She had a really good start to the season. Big recruit, big freshman. And as point guard, she was actually our leading rebounder for the season at 8.1 rebounds per game. Showed a lot of heart, a lot of hustle, and it's a really tough loss. But she'll be back next season. She'll be getting ready for the season, and I think she'll be a good leader for us going forward.
And another freshman who you mentioned is Sam Brunel, who's been phenomenal for the Irish this year, came in as a very highly touted recruit. She won the 3-point contest at the McDonald's All-American game, so really someone that came in with a lot of attention and has lived up to the hype. She's been huge for them this year and has really become a leader, even as a freshman, and that's not something that you typically expect, especially in women's basketball, which doesn't have the same one-and-done mentality that men's basketball might, so usually you don't see these freshmen come in and be so dominant so early. So to see Sam right now kind of take over the team and put them on her shoulders has been really interesting to watch, and something that as the season has gone on, she's developed into more of that leader for them, which I think has been an important part of their development, and maybe is why with this Miami win they can pivot to that next part of the season and hopefully have more success down the road.
Yeah, we saw her take on a much bigger role against Miami, 10 for 19 from the field and 25 points, our leading scorer of that game. So with Peoples out, Brunel will be looking for a much bigger role, looking for big things from her, developing the young players into more veteran leaders for next season. So.
Yeah, for sure. And this is a Notre Dame team, keep in mind, that when they lost to NC State by more than 30 is used to beating teams by more than 30. So it's definitely a different kind of test for this team. And Muffet McGraw, after the games, has been very emotional when they've lost. The most emotional that people have seen her in recent years, as she's saying, we're trying to figure out what else to do. In Miami, it looked like it clicked. So I think the hope now for this program is finding what worked then and carrying it into the rest of the season. And Kieran, we'll just see if they can do that from now on.
Awesome.
So,
thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for joining us. And now we have Grant Delvecchio, who's on to talk about hockey. And hockey over break was 2-3-1. So a bit of a similar record, but we'll talk about why there might be some bright spots in this record still. So thank you, Grant, for coming on.
Thank you for
Tell us
having
more
me,
about
Cameron.
hockey's break.
Yeah, so before we get into the team, if I may, I just want to congratulate 2 ND seniors, Cal Burke and Cale Morris. They were just selected as candidates for this year's Senior Class Award. So they formed 2 of the entire country's top 20 student athletes, both on and off the ice. The categories are the 4 C's: community, classroom, character, and competition. And so that's something that these guys should be very proud of. Cale Morris is also on the Hobie Baker Award list, which is for the nation's top overall hockey player in general. So for a goaltender, that's pretty remarkable. This is his second time being on that list. He was on it in 2018 when he also won the Mike Richter Award for best goaltender in the nation. So this is someone who's accustomed to having these awards. And Cal Burke is also, for the second year in award, up for the Hockey Humanitarian Award. So Jeff Jackson's team is performing well on the ice and off the ice as well. And I just feel like it was definitely necessary to mention that before we get into the season. But
yeah, well, I agree. And one other thing, too, is that leadership component, right, of these guys. I mean, they've been to the Frozen Four, so you have guys coming in now, these younger guys. What do you think that adds to them to have that experience and also have, you know, those awards in their background, the humanitarian work in their background? How does that help the team as a whole?
No, and this is something that Coach Jackson has spoke about a lot during the years, that they've had this struggles, and with a young and inexperienced team, there are some older guys like Cal Burke and Kel Morris who can really help this team out. A lot of the inexperience has been showing on the ice, unfortunately, in terms of when the Irish are getting down in games and then not being able to fight back. And so these guys who have been in the big moments before, as you mentioned, can add a lot of consistency, and also confidence is a big thing for this team, especially when they get down early in games.
Right, we'll talk about that more specifically, those games, especially the ones that went on over winter break when school was not in session and people were not on campus.
Right, yeah. So leading up to the break, definitely a rough spot for the Irish. 6-game losing streak, but right before the break, they get a big 3-0 win against Penn State. So things looking up. Get a nice 2-week break, a little bit of a refresher, and things may not have worked out the best for Notre Dame. They open up with Western Michigan, a game that in the first game they tie 1-1. Not very consistent play. They turn in the puck over a lot. Cale Morris was excellent, which is what kept them in the game ultimately. And then consistency is a huge thing. The Irish have not been able to score the puck that efficiently so far this year. And then you see in the second game against Western Michigan, they score 4 goals in 9 minutes in the second period. So it's not that this team isn't capable. It's just a matter of them doing it over and over again. And after that Western Michigan series, definitely a disappointing weekend. The weekend afterwards against rival Michigan, you get a 3-0 loss in the first game, followed by a 3-1 loss in the second game. And Coach Jackson did mention that it was a disappointing weekend, but there were some positives. Sophomore Michael Graham is hitting a stride now, and that second line for the Irish are playing a lot better than they did to start the season. So not all negatives from this break, but the inability to put the puck in the net has been haunting Notre Dame so far.
Yeah, and it seems like one of the things, too, was like that Michigan series had so much hype. Like, this was kind of like a crucial moment for this team, you know, going into that. And that was a big deal, as being like hyped up all week. And then it wasn't what the Irish would have wanted. It was those 3-0, 3-1 losses. So not only did they lose, but really just didn't get any momentum going, like we're kind of talking about. So when they turn to now the next part of the season and you're, you know, playing these conference opponents for the rest of the year, you're definitely trying to find that momentum and see what works. But you talk about Cale Morris being a bright spot, and that's something that's been so consistent throughout the season. And Cale Morris, 14 saves versus Ohio State in that last game, a 2-1 loss to Ohio State in the second game of that series, but still just so consistent and, you know, such a big part of this team and why they're hoping to have success still in the latter part of their season.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this team really has a ton of key pieces that are very helpful for the team, but really they're nothing without Cale Morris. I think Coach Jackson would agree with that, in the fact that they are not going to win the games if Cale Morris is not performing at a high level, and he has been. His save percentage is .942 since the December 14th win against Penn State. So while the team hasn't, really it's a production issue for the offensive side of things for the Irish. The defense has had some mishaps, some bad penalties here and there, but Cale Morris is playing well, and when he's not, the Irish are just a completely different team. So if they're going to keep winning, they're going to need to score the puck to help out Cale Morris, because he's only doing so much that he can, Caroline.
Right, and the Irish ranked 18th going into that Michigan series, now dropping, but still receiving votes for that coaches poll. So we'll have to see where they go from here.
Yeah.
But definitely a team on the brink of that top 20 ranking, fighting to get their way back in.
Yeah, definitely. One other thing I want to mention is that the season is not over for this Irish team. While people are very down on them, they still have 10 games left. They have the potential to get their 30 points in, and it's Big Ten competition. There are no easy games. That's the other thing. Like, you play Big Ten hockey, you're playing Penn State, you're playing Michigan, you're playing Minnesota, the big-time teams game in and game out. So there are no easy games. It's just a matter of competing at that high level, and I think the Irish can. I mean, that 6-game losing streak was a really rough patch, but all teams that they played during that 6-game losing streak are top 20 hockey teams. So I think if I were to speak to Notre Dame fans, I'd say not to worry. I mean, there's big games this weekend against Wisconsin, and I think that this Notre Dame men's ice hockey team is going to figure it out in the second half of the season and really perform at a high level.
Yeah, it's a grueling schedule, but definitely gives the chance for some huge wins. So there's a good and bad side to that. But thanks so much for the insight, Grant.
Thank you
and
for
next
having
we
me.
have Chris with swim and dive. So the final sport that we'll be talking about today. And swim and dive had maybe the least action over break, but also had a 10-day training trip to Florida, which will hopefully propel them in the rest of the season. So hi, Chris. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, good to be back.
Tell us more about swim and dive's winter break.
Swim and Dive's winter break was, for the most part, pretty uneventful. They had their last meet on November 21st before the break. That's even before Thanksgiving break, so that's a long while back. And they didn't have their next meet until January 11th. So it was a long break. You know, some people, their breaks are like, you know, I got up at 9:30 a.m. and I ran 5 miles. And some people, it's like, I woke up at 4 p.m. and I've been wearing the same sweatpants for a week.
Which one were you over break?
Me or the swim team?
You. Sorry,
Me.
Chris Frick. What was Chris Frick over the break?
No comment.
Okay, now what was swim and dive
So
over
it was
the
like
break?
2 p.m. and I'd only been wearing the sweatpants for like 4 days.
That's good.
But yeah, no, but swim and dive, they did do their work. They went to Florida for 10 days, had a training session there, and so far it's proven to pay off. They had the meet January 11th. Their women's team beat both Illinois and Iowa, and their men's team lost in a close one to Iowa. And you know, Coach Litzinger talked about the loss for the men's team, and he really attributed it to Iowa's depth, and just said that the men's side needed to be a little bit more aggressive, needed to ramp up their intensity a little bit against Northwestern, which was last weekend. And guess what they did, Caroline?
They ramped up their energy.
They ramped up that intensity. They really showed up against Northwestern last week, their first home meet in a while at the Rolfs Aquatic Center here at Notre Dame. The men beat Northwestern 151-92, and the women beat them 169-74. So
yeah, and a ranked
numbers
Northwestern team too. A good Northwestern team. The women ranked 25th. So now the Notre Dame women go from receiving votes to being vaulted into number 12 in the poll. So definitely a big jump for them. The men's team also ranked 16 now. So, you know, 2 great teams on swim and dive. And, you know, off break when they didn't have a lot of stuff going on, it's something that maybe falls a little bit by the wayside, that people don't realize how good swim and dive is this year, but they really are strong, and they're going into the Shamrock Invitational, which they're hosting this weekend, ranked both in the top 16 in the country.
Yeah, Shamrock Invitational going to be big this weekend. You know, there's a couple people from Notre Dame to look out for there. Zach Yaden, obviously the big one. He's I mean, this guy's like practically an Olympian. He's incredible to watch in the pool. Set a pool record last week against Northwestern in the 500 freestyle. Would have set a pool record in the 1,000-yard swim if he hadn't had a false start penalty. But yeah, he's been really impressive. And then on the women's side, both Abby Dolan, Colleen Gilliland, they've been performing really well. Colleen Gilliland set a record in the 200 fly last week against Northwestern. A lot of pool records. That was a big meet for them. But yeah, Shamrock Invitational this weekend. They're hosting, it's a crowded pool. They've got Missouri State, Akron, Ohio State, and Iowa. The big one there is Ohio State. They're a big program. But yeah, it should be interesting to see what happens. I think Coach Litzinger, he realizes that there's a lot to get excited about over the individual records and the individual accords, but in the end, he does talk about it. It is a team sport. He wants his team to perform well together, to hype each other up, and I think they really did that last week against Northwestern, and I think he's looking to build upon that.
Yeah, and it definitely is. That's the nature of swimming, you know, that team sport with the individual mentality, too. So it kind of has both sides of that. And a lot of these relays for the Irish have been performing really well, too. They've won a lot of the medley relays. They've been in recent meets. So, you know, you look at that, and it's like different components of that, the individual races, those individual pool records. Jack Hoagland had one at Iowa as well in the 1,000 free. So some of those individual benchmarks that they're trying to reach, but also on the team side, performing very, very well as a unit, and definitely a sport that involves both sides of that. So a fun one to watch, and one that really Notre Dame fans should be paying more attention to, because this year's swim and dive team, they're both really strong.
Yeah, those Irish relays are electric. They're so fun to watch. Everyone, the team gets so hyped. They're chanting. They're doing the oh thing when someone's about to dive into the pool. It's amazing. And
Chris has no bias whatsoever, being the announcer for those meets. So if you're around campus this weekend and want to check out swim and dive, they're hosting the Shamrock Invitational, and you can hear Chris announcing some of those names on the mic tomorrow, right, Chris?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's going to be a good time. Come for the swimmers, not for my voice. But my voice is there, too. It's great.
It's both. You get both sides of it. Also this weekend, hockey plays Wisconsin tonight and tomorrow. Men's basketball travels to Florida State tomorrow, and women's basketball takes on Virginia on Sunday. So an exciting weekend of sports here for Notre Dame winter sports. And it was great to hear from all of these people about what happened over the break when no one was on campus to really keep up with that. So maybe you kept up with football in their bowl game. Maybe you kept up with some men's basketball, women's basketball, maybe some hockey and some dive. But now here's your whole recap. And from now, Chris, I want to talk about one team that each of us is the most excited about the rest of the season, because we're turning towards the second half now, coming back from break, teams entering more of their conference play schedules. So right now, Chris, what is the team that you were the most excited about?
I would say I'm most excited about men's basketball. I know they've been struggling a little bit, but they're showing improvement. You know, last year they were losing a lot in the ACC, and they were losing kind of badly. They weren't playing these teams close. This year they're still losing, but they're getting a little bit better. And I feel like this is a team that they just feel like they're one piece away from being like a real contender within college basketball. And I mean, college basketball is so volatile this year. There's so many teams, so many good teams that are losing to teams who people wouldn't consider to be that good. So I think Notre Dame is a team that can really be competitive and go toe-to-toe with anyone in the country when they're at their best. The problem is they're not always at their best. You know, John Mooney's been playing really well. Jim Boeheim, after their game against Syracuse a couple days ago, he called John Mooney one of the top 25 players in the country. So, I mean, he's been a staple for them, averaging a double-double. But it's really the role guys that have to step up, you know. Prentice Hub, TJ Gibbs, Dane Goodwin, if those guys are shooting well and playing at a consistent level, this is a team that can be really good. But the problem is the inconsistency is there, and they're also really thin. They've only got 9 guys on the team who can play at any time due to injuries and transfers.
Well, we talk about when they're at their best, too, and that UCLA game a couple weeks ago really looked like them at their best. That men's basketball team dominated UCLA in a game that I think people thought would be a lot closer than it was, but really there was no contest. The men's basketball team looked dominant from the beginning in that game against UCLA, a big name, a big program coming into South Bend. So that was definitely a fun game to watch, and that was because the threes were falling. And that's a big piece for them, too, is when those threes fall and when they can make those, they look a lot better than when they're shooting them. And that's the problem, is that that's just such a big piece for this team, you know, is their three-point shooting. And so that's one thing that with those inconsistencies, it's one of the biggest parts of that.
Yeah, absolutely. They're really a shooting team, and that's why they could use another guy who can create his own shots more. You know, Hub's really good at creating his own shots, and Gibbs is as well. You know, guys like Nate Leshevsky, Dane Goodwin, they're more catch-and-shoot guys. So they really need somebody who can create and make their own shot in order to kind of propel themselves forward, I think.
Yeah, well, to turn to the other side of basketball on campus, I'm most excited about women's basketball. This Miami win, to me, is a big sign that this team can go into the rest of the season and finally have all the pieces they need for their success. Having Michaela Vaughn back, yes, it hurts to lose Anea Peoples, but Michaela Vaughn back is just a huge part of this. She provides them that big spot so Sam Brunell can return to more of her shooting prowess that she's had to kind of like step into the big spot in the absence of Michaela Vaughn. So allowing her to go back to more of a traditional role should help the team as a whole. And I'm excited to see what happens with them in the rest of the season. This is such a young team. And assistant coach Beth Cunningham said at the beginning of the year, this is a team that the good part is, you know they will improve throughout the season because they are so young. Last year's team, like, how much can you really coach when you have 5 such experienced starters coming back, but you lose all of them, plus a couple others to injuries. And now finally you have this team that's so young, so inconsistent, so inexperienced. But the bright spot of that, as the coaches have pointed out, is that you know they have nowhere to go but up. And they really have so far, and I think that they will continue to do that, starting with that Miami win that they notched this week. So I'm excited to see the future of women's basketball this year and see where they can go from here. So thank you so much for joining us from Shamrock Sports. Those are 2 sports that we are excited to see more of, but keep in mind, all winter sports will be home in the next week, so you can catch them on campus. Make sure to do so because it's an exciting time for sports at Notre Dame, even though football is over now. Thank you for watching Shamrock Sports.